If you look at those companies that have done the best, it's where you've got continuity in leadership and you give people time to let their talents grow and their strategies mature.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leading differently. I'm Zoe Amma.
And I'm Paul Thomas. Our podcast exists to help leaders and their teams understand what they need to do differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. We started Starts at the Top as a podcast about digital disruption, but we soon realised that leaders were telling us about something more important and urgent, about how traditional ways of leading had changed forever.
We make it our mission to speak to leaders who are carving out new ways of leading, and we cover topics from emerging tech to inclusion, from remote work to mental health and climate change. Basically, all the subjects that today's leaders need to be across in 2024.
And our podcast isn't about shiny corporate case studies. It's about lessons learned and progress made the hard way, and crucially, how that can inspire others.
On today's episode, we share our interview with Mark Shayler, author of You Can't Make Money from a Dead Planet and founder of APE, a sustainability and innovation studio. This is a conversation that we had with Mark last year about the book and his work helping organisations find sustainable ways of making business profitable and sustainable.
And before we get to the conversation with Mark, I thought this week we'd have a little fireside chat, Zoe, about AI. And I found myself in a lot of conversations this week. There was an article, so I do a lot of work with accountancy firms, and there was an article on the BBC, which I will share, which was about the new generation of trainees coming into accountancy firms being the first generation of accountants to grow up alongside AI, and what does that mean? And I think it's really interesting. We should go into that in a couple of episodes' time once I've had the time to absorb it and think about how it fits. And I remember a conversation. So we had a change in leadership in the firm that I used to work for, and the entire marketing team was brought together one day. And we were sort of said, come along and meet the new CEO. We're going to hear all about the plans for the future. And the first thing that they did was to show us a video. And I think, again, it was a BBC video about robots and innovation. And basically what was told to the entire room was, enjoy your time in marketing because it's essentially over. The AI and the robots are going to take over, and that's going to be the end of your careers. But you've got time to make hay while the sun shines and that sort of thing. It wasn't quite that dramatic, but it was kind of here's what's going to happen in the future. So the conversations I've been having this week have been around that and around the degrees of comfort within our industry towards AI and what it might mean for our roles and for the roles of the clients or the clients that we work with and what it means for them. So I just thought it was worth saying that a view today that I have is that marketing professionals seem to be ready to embrace it. So yeah, bring it on. It's going to be helpful in almost every respect. And we welcome the innovation and the change. And yeah, we're all in. PR people seem to be a little bit more cautious and a little bit more thoughtful around, okay, well, we need to understand how this is affecting us. But crucially, yeah, we're happy to work alongside it. And then on the communication side, the internal communication side, there's an even greater degree of caution and a question of authenticity and actually, attribution. Who wrote this? I didn't write this. I take pride in what I write and I take pride in what I say. And therefore, using AI just feels like it's a bit of an alien concept. And I just wondered how you were seeing it within your business and how the people you work with were starting to have conversations with you about it.
Absolutely. So I'll speak to how myself and my team are using it before I look more broadly at what's going on outside our organisation. I'm using it all day, every day, not to do everything, but a bit like having an additional member of the team to help me generate ideas, to challenge some of the things I'm coming up with, to help draft emails. So I'm finding it an absolutely invaluable tool. Obviously, I'm very mindful of what data I put into it. And then with the charities that we work with, it's a real mixed bag, actually. There are some charities who are really keen and really moving forward. And there are other charities who are a bit more nervous about it. And some of it's to do with skills, but it's also to do with what's going on in the organisation. Frankly, it's also about culture as well. So it's a very variable picture out there. And actually, one of the things that we're doing as part of this year's Charity Digital Skills Report is to gather some data on where charities are at with AI. So that's what we're currently doing, and also gathering data about climate change, because I know that's a topic very close to the heart of today's guest. So once we have that data that will be out there in middle of July, then yeah, I can certainly say more about what we're seeing across the sector and what the trends are.
Yeah, I think very much the same view from me. It's that sense of it's useful, isn't it? When you work on your own, I think that's the bit that I've found really helpful. When you work on your own, it's a thing to bounce ideas. I was going to say a person. It's another person. As you said, it's another voice in the room to be able to bounce ideas off, to refine ideas. And I didn't use it, so I've just put a new website live. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks' time. But the website, I wrote all the copy myself, but I used AI to help me make it more succinct, to take words out. It will surprise our listeners that I can be quite wordy. And sometimes it's good to have somebody to come along and challenge that. And that's the way that I've used it, is to refine rather than to create. So it'll be interesting to see how each of these industries, and they're all putting out reports all the time, the latest sort of thinking in internal comms and AI and PR and AI, marketing and AI. It'll be interesting to see where it turns in the next 6 to 12 months.
Definitely. Yeah, I think a lot is going to change in this space very, very quickly over the next year. So I'm both excited and a bit nervous. Well, I'll put the link to the survey in the show notes. But now we're going to speak to Mark Shayler. We are very excited to welcome Mark Shayler to Starts at the Top. Mark is a best-selling author and sustainability strategist. He works with businesses of all sizes with clients including Coca-Cola, Bacardi and WPP, helping them to save over $200 million per year due to better environmental performance. He is a founding partner of Do Lectures and is a visiting fellow in sustainable design at Loughborough University. And we were very excited to read his new book, You Can't Make Money from a Dead Planet, The Sustainable Method for Driving Profits. Mark, welcome to Starts at the Top. We are delighted to have you here.
Me too. I'm really excited. Thank you for inviting me.
It's our pleasure. Our pleasure. So congratulations on the book. It was really interesting to read this. It's a subject very close to both of our hearts. I was really struck by something that you said at the beginning of the book, where you were setting the scene around the challenges of being truly sustainable within capitalism. Do you think that is a particular challenge for our times? Can businesses ever be truly sustainable in a capitalist economy?
Yes, I mean, it's the nub of the issue, isn't it? Capitalism was established, and the rules of capitalism have been established to encourage free market trading, and that doesn't protect certain things. One of those is labour. One of those is I guess the commons, or the rights of the environment, not just from where we extract things from, but also where we place pollution into. Consequently, those things have had to have been taxed, essentially. There has to be some financial mechanism within capitalism to protect those things that are unprotectable within an open market. And that's good. That's a good thing. So I think this is tricky. I think we need a new version of capitalism. And we've talked about capitalism 2.0 numerous times. I think we kind of need to push that a little bit further and to look at the good that capitalism can do. When we first started in this, good could only be managed financially. And the Companies Act reflects this whole idea of shareholder return. If we can bring forward the idea of protecting the commons, which we have, but also growing the commons. So not only is there shareholder return, but there's nature return as well. If we can enshrine that in some way, and we are beginning to, then we can have a form of capitalism that is a little more benign, a little more longer term thinking rather than profit on quarter or annual basis. And if I'm honest, a little bit kinder to everybody concerned. I think there's an appetite for this. I think the boomers are the last generation that want unbridled growth and unbridled capitalistic gain. I think once they die, and we're not far away from that, I think the appetite for change will be different. And those role models for business that we have currently, things like The Apprentice or Dragon's Den, they will begin to look anachronistic and irrelevant. And I think we're beginning to see businesses shift and change. And this is driven by a change in the way that people believe, what they believe in, and an ability to express that in a way that feels a little less hippie. So if we look at some of the Edelman research and others, there are many, many others, the rise of the belief-driven consumer, and I've done little rabbit ears around consumer because it's a weird word, is massive. It's astronomical. It doesn't always translate into how they spend their money. I appreciate that. But the rise of beliefs within consumers, huge. But the thing that's really going to change things is not that. It's the rise of the belief-driven employee. And this is where we're going to see the significant rubber hit in the road, where everyone wants to work for a company that does good, because no one wants to project the fact that they are doing harm to the planet. So they're looking for employers who are aligned with something bigger than profit. This isn't easy and it isn't fast. It's going to take a long, long time to do. But that, to me, is one of the most hopeful things we see.
And that's really exciting, isn't it? Because it feels like a potentially whole new way of doing business and a whole new way of looking at those metrics for success. How do you think we might bring leaders along on that journey? And I'm thinking also of businesses where you might have some sort of external investment and there's a lot of pressure to focus solely on profit rather than, I loved your point there about, nature return. How can we get leaders to shift their mindsets about this stuff?
It's a really good question. I think leaders are prone, well, not all leaders. Some leaders are prone to incredibly short-term thinking, which is geared around, frankly, their retirement. And they want to leave having added financial value to the business and take a decent-sized pension pot. And what is decent? And how much do you really, truly need to live on? What is enough? But I think that's changing. I think reputation, brand, and there's a very, very loaded word, good and bad brand. We can come back to this in a minute. But reputation, the half-life of the good that you do as an individual, these are becoming increasingly important. And when we see the mega rich, we see the Bill Gates and the Yvon Chouinards of the world changing the way their business runs because they want to leave good rather than potentially harm in the world, then I think that will lead other leaders to change the way that they see the way the world has to be. That's all counting it. I'm going to underline all of that with that they need to have made enough money to feel comfortable to do so. I'm not naive, right? If you're poor, it's not good, right? You have to have enough money to live on. So I think we're going to see brands and therefore brand leaders thinking about the way their business looks and therefore the way that they look. And that the half-life of your business will be measured less in money and more in social and environmental input as we move into this next era, this next version of capitalism. So I think leaders are ready and waiting. I think leaders have the space at the moment to be able to think about bigger, more philosophical benefits of business. As soon as the recession bites, if we are going to enter another wave of recession, which frankly we will, that might change as it always does. But I think the appetite from leaders is huge. I think what they lack is the strategic tools, and that's what the book tries to give them, is those strategic tools.
Do you think some of that is around the sort of the short-termism? I mean, I was with a business leader yesterday that I've been working with for a couple of years, and the good news is that they were talking about extending his term leading that organisation, and that would be, I think he was talking about 15 years overall at the top of an organisation. But in most cases, those CEOs that step into roles are there for, 3 to 5 years. Organisational strategies are usually based around a 5-year plan. This is what we're going to do to get us from here to here. I'm pretty sure we're going to see a lot of that in the next couple of years as people go, 2030, there's a strategy. And that sort of short-term leadership that says, I'll get us to that point and then step away, means that they're not thinking long-term. We're not thinking about the long-term longevity of the organization, of the planet, of the things that we hold dear. We're thinking about how we get to the next step, and then we'll hand over responsibility to someone else. Do you think that plays a role?
Absolutely. I think it probably is the most pivotal role. It's the Blackpool that runs through the stick of rock that is this problem. These short-term timescale, this thinking that is so compressed. It's get me to whatever that 5-year period. And we're lucky, right? Because I'll be honest with you, Paul, when I was working with one of the large supermarkets, the kind of timescale people were working to was 2 years. 2-year strategy and out, 2 years and out, and then 3. And now we are at 5, and that's amazing. But if you look at those companies and those sporting teams actually that have done the best, it's where you've got continuity in leadership and you give people time to let their talents grow and their strategies mature. If you chop and change too soon, we see this flip-flapping between different approaches. So not only are the timescales of business too short at 5 years, I think the timescales of politics and leadership are too short at 5 years as well. And we need to be thinking about the never-ending game, how we can still be relevant and be here in 30 years, and look at having maybe 2 kind of caretaker managers over that 30-year period rather than 10, which is where we used to be. You're dead right. That's exactly where we need to think. Nature doesn't think in 3-year cycles. It thinks in generations, and that's where we need to go to.
It's really interesting because we had Ian Dunt, the political journalist, on the podcast a few months back, and he was saying something very similar about government. This short-term thinking that is sometimes seen in government, and his suggestion was that, well, actually, what we should be doing is bringing back ministers a year or 2 or even longer after key decisions have been made, to review the impact of the decisions that they were involved in. And I think that's something I'd love to see in business as well, actually, because if you've got the wrong CEO and they're making the wrong decisions about this, particularly in some of the big corporates that you've worked in, then that legacy could be absolutely toxic, couldn't it, to the planet?
Totally. And I find it staggering that we don't do that for 2 reasons. Number one, you're responsible as a leader. She comes in with a new idea, a new approach, delivers it, buggers off, and then in 5 years' time, it's either chaos or sunlit uplands. And then come back and say, well, I'm responsible for that, and put your hand up, and maybe pay some of the money back if it's gone badly, or maybe not. I don't know. So number one, that responsibility I think is super important. Number 2, when people move on so quickly, we lose talent and understanding, and we change the culture of the business. And I think it's really important that we look at the strengths that people can take away and then leave with the organization, and to bring those great leaders back. We see this in sport all the time. Warren Gatland and the Welsh rugby team has just come back in. It doesn't matter who it is or what the team is or even what the sport is. He's just come back in after a longer tenure, and where it all went wrong in between. And there's this stability, it's okay. Someone has got their eye on where we're going. Someone understands where we're headed to. And that brings with it a number of things. It brings with it freedom to invent and create and to play. It brings with it this idea of stability. Someone's in who knows what they're doing. It calms the markets because at the moment everything's measured by profitability. And when the market gets excitable, the confidence falls. Great talent leaves the organization. New people come in who maybe don't understand the culture, but maybe they do. And you end up with this horrible spiral rather than this slower, more mature growth. There's a phrase I use a lot. The strongest wood comes from the slowest growing trees. And that's the truth. Those trees that grow really quickly, they tend to be thin and spindly, and they produce wood that's really only fit for chipboard. Those trees that grow really slowly, like the British temperate rainforest that we've lost over the last 1,000 years, they produce the strongest wood, and that's the stuff that can survive the longest. So I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly where we need to head.
if that's the case, and we're looking at leadership, creating stronger forests or stronger trees, what are the steps that they should be making? If we were to recommend a sort of a 5-step process to organizational leaders about, how to address sustainability and make it a core part of their strategy, how could we go about that? I guess, and I think, having looked at the way that these things are going within organizations I work with, the idea of CSR is receding. It's not, we're going to send our employees into a school to build a classroom, paint a classroom, or build a greenhouse out of plastic bottles anymore. I think organisations do want to do more. So what are the steps that they should be taking to make sure that this isn't just lip service to the environment and is actually part of the core organisational strategy?
That's a really great question, Paul. And the example you give around CSR is interesting. When I was head of sustainability for Asda some 23 years ago, I was a team of one, and I sat in the PR team. That tells you everything you need to know about how seriously that was taken in that organisation at the time. It's different now. There are hundreds of people dealing with the same workload that I dealt with, and they're doing it significantly better. No surprises at all. And this whole idea of giving time over here to offset bad that you've done over here, it's dead. It's absolutely dead. So having a coherent approach, I think there's probably more than 5 steps, if I'm really honest with you, probably 7. I think it starts with having a really clear purpose that either sits alongside or slightly in front of money. If you're not making money, if you're not making profit, you're not a business, right? You've got to make profit. It's as simple as that. But having that clear purpose, and I go back every single time to Simon Sinek's Start With Why, and I know it's 13 years old. I know it is. It's really old. But I think it puts us in exactly the right place. People don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it. Align with me and I'll look after you. I think that is where we start. What is your why? And it's not a profit. That's a side impact. That's a result of your pure why. So I'd start with a really pure why, different from mission, vision, and values. It's way more important than that. Then develop a policy and a strategy that are really simple to understand, that fit on one side of paper, that set out what your environmental vision is. Your corporate why, and that might be to pull people together around food. That's a really great, when people share food, they share ideas. That's a really perfect why. And then you have a strategy around doing that with less harm and with more good. And in the food industry, that's fascinating because you can go into regenerative agriculture. That's step 2, policy and strategy. Step 3 would be get the basics right. Do your carbon footprint. Understand the metrics of your impact. Again, really straightforward. Scope 1, 2, and 3. These things are very easy to do, or very easy to get someone in to do. Number 4, you now need a culture. And this culture has got to be about experimentation, play, profitability, but also longevity. And building a culture is the hardest thing to do out of all of those things that I've talked about so far. And then you need to look at how you can increase the skill set of the business. So when I was at Asda all those years ago, there was just me. At the same time, Marks and Spencer's were developing Plan A, and rather than have one person, they did have a very good leader there actually, but rather than have one person, every single part of their team, every single product had to have a Plan A attribute. It had to answer the question of, how does this contribute to Plan A? So all of a sudden, there's not one person. Mike Barry's brilliant, but beyond that, there are now 1,000 people in that organization saying, hang on a minute, have we considered sustainability? And then I think the most core part, the most crucial part of this, which I think I'm on step 5, but I might be on step 6, we'll see, is to embed sustainability into the heart of the innovation process. We're going to innovate a new product, a new service, a new whatever piece of packaging, whatever it might be. Let's put sustainability in the heart of that. It has to be sustainable. And here are our metrics, and they're going to vary from one sector to another. And we build it in rather than bolting it on to the end of the PR process, the marketing process. Really important functions, but this isn't an afterthought. This is putting it right into the center. And that's how I would do this. They're the however many steps that was I would take. I think there were 6 there, but I might be wrong.
But I think what you're saying, and I think this is the core thing, isn't it? That within an organizational structure, there are various teams that will fight for a seat at the table. And this is a question I've sent a client of mine a message last night with a picture of your book saying, I know you're talking about this at the moment. Have you got any questions that I can ask Mark that would be relevant to you? And I guess what their question really was about making it a core objective, and to do that, feeling that they needed to have a seat at the table. And how do they get that seat at the table in an organization where marketing wants a seat at the table, communications wants a seat at the table, everyone wants a seat at the table? And in my experience, that sort of the environmental part of that, even if you had people within a team hidden away in a PR team or somewhere with us at Grant Thornton, it was in sort of marketing communications space. Even if you do, are those people sitting around the table when those decisions are being made? And the answer is often, I found, no. It might be changing, and it probably is changing now. But I guess it's that question that they asked was, how do you ensure a seat at the table when there are all these other priorities and everyone's fighting for this? How do you make sure you're there making this a sort of a shared objective within each of those teams?
It's a really great question, and things are changing. Firstly, when I started, I'm 33 years in the sector now. The question that boards asked me were, can you keep us out of prison? I mean, literally, that was, can you keep us out of jail? And now that's more through, and I go through this in the book, that's more for a number of other questions, to the point of, can you keep us relevant? And that's the most important question. Are we still relevant to a changing market and a changing world? So I think there are two ways of looking at this, Paul. I think, firstly, how do we get a seat at the table? You draw a mind map of how much this impacts everybody else's job. So this is a massive impact on technology. It's a massive impact on sourcing. It's a huge impact on reputation and brand. It's a massive impact on governance. It's a huge impact on kind of corporate affairs generally. So how many other places does this impact? And then say, okay, well, I can't do all of those, right? I don't know your job, but I can teach you my job so that you take my job into yours. And I sit on the board as someone who oversees all of this. And this is the temptation here, is you become the yes but person. You can't. You have to be the yes and. You've got to be the one that doesn't put a brake on anything, but one that reframes things so that you can grow a good business rather than stop a bad business. We've got to move beyond stopping bad businesses. That's option one. So you have a place on the board for somebody who looks after responsibility, we'll call it generally. Number two, you think of yourself like Intel rather than like the person that makes the computer. So you sit inside the organization and you power up everybody else's role. So you don't need a seat on the board. Nature's got a seat on the board, but your job is to make sure that every single person going to that board meeting on a regular basis understands the sustainability implications in terms of reputation, PR, environmental impact, carbon, supply chain reliability, tendering. So you sit behind, you lead from behind. Now, to my mind, that sandwich is more effective. Big voice, big PR campaign, big events, and then power everybody else from behind. You're the fire that sits underneath everyone. That's the way I would go at this. Rather than saying, I need to be on the board myself, I would make sure everybody else on the board really, truly gets what you're doing.
And what about small businesses? So the businesses that Paul and I run are kind of like micro businesses, really, in many ways, largely working remotely, providing services. What can businesses like ours do in order to be more sustainable?
Okay, well, it's the same, but on a much smaller scale. I cut my teeth. I had the best apprenticeship ever. So when I graduated, very early 90s, I got a job with Bradford Council working on small business environmental support. This was when councils managed the business support rather than Business Link. I don't even know where it exists anymore. And so I would sit in the centre of Bradford and see maybe a firm a day, possibly two a day. So I'd be doing 20 to 40 different businesses a month, 100 and 400 a year, right? I'd be seeing all of these amazing businesses. And I'd have to know this much about that many businesses, and very little about a lot of businesses. And they were all either SMEs, so under at that point it was under 500, it soon went down to 250, or they were micro businesses. And I would meet them where they were. I would always ask, what are the things you're worried about from a sustainability perspective? And right now, that attention will focus straight on plastic. There'll be not one hesitation. It'll go straight to plastic. And that's because of a brilliant David Attenborough episode, which was actually bookended by two issues. The back end was all about plastic and the front end was all about no one knows. But I've just asked you, you can't remember what it was. No one can remember what it was. It's climate change, which is the single most important thing we have to deal with now, followed by biodiversity loss, and then we can move into specifics like the ocean emergency that we're in as well. So I would then meet them where they were. Number one, what are your concerns? Number two, what are your impacts? Get the basics right. Where are you buying your energy? What resources do you use? And then I would go into the really powerful thing. What impact can you have outside of your organization? Can you be an amplifier for the message? You're really tiny. Your environmental impact will be little, but can you be an amplifier for the message? Can you work collectively? So I pulled together a group of businesses, maybe I think 30 or 40 businesses, and we put them through an environmental training program, and they had that for free, funded by the local authority. And in return, they had to go and train 5 others. And in return, those 5 others had to go and train 5 others. So we called it Training Cascade, just an amplifier. And we ended up having a really powerful regional movement of businesses that were saying, yeah, but what about the sustainability bit? Or yes, and what about the sustainability bit? And so I always start where they are, measure the basics, and then look at the impact that they can have positively rather than just reducing their negative impact, and then pull people together. And there are many ways of pulling people together. We've seen the blossoming, the booming even of the B Corp movement, and that's a really good thing. But as soon as people come together, then you can make a much louder noise collectively.
Yeah, we were going to ask you about the B Corp movement. So again, I did a lot of work. Well, I guess about 5-6 years ago now, working within Grant Thornton, maybe even longer ago than that when it first started, but they were looking quite strongly at that journey to become a B Corp. And at the time, I think it's probably around the reporting and what they were prepared to share and show around various reporting. I don't think they were afraid with the sort of the environmental side. I think it was some of the other bits and pieces. And since they started to look at it, I have seen other accountancy firms, Cooper Parry is one, for example, who have gone through that process and become B Corps. The worry for me with that is that it might start to become all about the journey and the chase and we think it's a good idea if we become a B Corp because it's going to, as you said right at the beginning, it's going to lead to more employees wanting to join us. Employees want to join that type of organization. We want to think that we're doing good. So I wonder if it becomes a little bit too much about the badge chase. And then once the badge is there, is that enough? Is that a sort of a case of we've got the badge and we've gone through the journey and therefore we have done everything that we need to do to make this something that is sustainable for the future? Or is it just chasing a badge?
Oh, Paul, this is a beautiful question. And it takes me in so many directions. Firstly, I'll make this really clear. I welcome B Corp's existence. When it wasn't here, we had ISO 14000 series, we had the European Union EMAS scheme, we had things that had numbers on them and they lacked humanity. So first off, before I say what I'm going to say next, I really welcome the fact that it's here. That said, I'm going to go into the next stuff. So firstly, I think this is badge chasing. The amount of people that I know that are rushing towards B Corp because they think it makes them look good rather than do good is massive. And that's twinned with the fact that B Corp isn't good enough at the moment. It isn't. The environmental elements of B Corp are no way near good enough. And they are about to rewrite it. I know this work is ongoing now, so I'm very much looking forward to what comes out of that piece of work and seeing a more stringent approach to sustainability and a more what's the word? People will need to report on what they've done in a different way. Number 3 or 4. Back in the day when everyone went vegan, do you remember that? About 5 years ago, there was a joke. You don't need to ask if anyone's vegan. they will be sure to tell you, right? And it's funny, and I get it, and I'm mainly plant-based, so I'm probably part of that problem as well. The same with B Corp. You don't need to ask if they're B Corp. Trust me, the first things they'll say is, well, we're a B Corp now, don't you know? Or it'll be on their letterhead, or it'll be, this is a marketing badge. That's not good enough. That is nowhere near good enough. And I'm tired of it, even though I love it. I don't tell anyone whether or not we've got B Corp. I just keep it completely quiet, or whether we're going for it. It's not part of the conversation. We're a really small business doing really, really good things. And I can tell you those stories. I don't need to lean on a badge. And then we move into the next challenge that I have here. Some of the organizations that go through the process and have got B Corp, I would say, are not necessarily good regenerative business practices. I would say that you can get B Corp without necessarily being a regenerative, globally positive business. And is that a bad thing or a good thing? To create a hunger for change is amazing. To create businesses that want to change what they do, incredible. But you've always been able to get ISO 14001 if you're a tobacco company, and you can probably get B Corp if you're a tobacco company. You grow tobacco badly with lots of pesticides and you kill people. Like, these are not good things to be supporting. I don't want to get into the ethics of personal choice. You want to kill yourself? Crack on. However, don't expect a stamp of goodness to your business for doing so. So I have lots of problems, not just with B Corp, but with the seeking of badges for approval. However, I go back to what I said first. I'm really glad B Corp's there. I think it's a great initiative that does well. The issue isn't B Corp, never was. The issue is the people that have got it and how it's used. And chasing that isn't the answer to growing a regenerative, creative, and vibrant organization that will last the next 50 years.
Completely agree. And then I guess you go back to the 6 or the 7 point plan. We can't remember how many, but there were some good points in there that people should follow in order to start to move towards attaining something that goes beyond just the badge. It's now we're clear that this is part of our overall strategy. And look, it just so happens that if we wanted to, we could apply for B Corp. But is there an alternative? Is there something that that people can sort of look to alongside that as another aspiration? Is that the sort of the best we have at the moment?
Yeah, there are many alternatives to B Corp. They tend to be very sector specific and very technical. So therefore, they're not really alternatives to B Corp. You can show you're doing good in lots and lots of ways. There isn't one wraparound. There's the stamp for being a great business. B Corp is all we have at the moment. It isn't good enough and it isn't used well. But I will support and defend everything that they do and hope that it will change and become more in line with where the world needs to be. So there isn't anything else. However, what I will say is it's very long-winded, very expensive, and I'm really happy for people to be a shadow B Corp. That's not an official term, nor should it be. But to have to go through the entire process, to go through the checklist, and to be able to say, we're not B Corp, but we follow the B Corp principle. It's the same with the Ethical Trading Initiative. We follow the Ethical Trading Initiative base code without necessarily being approved or certified in any way. So I think we need a B Corp. I don't want to say a B Corp light, because I think it needs to be stronger and more and actually more challenging than B Corp, but without the huge fees that come with accreditation and the weight. Why would you slow people down becoming B Corp? Let's do something that everyone can do. Let's give them that. If they want that badge, that's absolutely fine. Call it C Corp. I'm not bothered. But let's do something that everyone can get behind and say, yes, this is where we want to go. I did a project for dentists called D Corp. And that's exactly what I did. I just went, okay, these are the processes. You want to join in, do it. And you can say I am a D Corp, because I've told you you can. And that means nothing in practice, but it meant that they'd gone through the basic principles of governance and environmental impact. So we need to widen it. We need to make it significantly more effective in terms of allowing other companies to come on board with it and creating the change. There's a stat, and I think it came from the conversations around ISO 9000 or BS 5750, as it was called back in the day, which I think 15% of a population, a business population, adopting something is the breakthrough percentage. At that point, it becomes mainstream. Its awareness has become mainstream. We're nowhere near 15% of the business population having B Corp. So how can we do that? That's what really interests me.
Brilliant. Yeah, so we need to think really differently about this stuff, don't we? This has been so inspiring, Mark. Thank you. One thing that I wanted to discuss before we wrap up is I was really struck by the chapter in your book about good news and reasons to stay cheerful, because the more we all learn about climate change, the more worrying it all seems to be, doesn't it? What reasons are there for people to stay positive now?
Oh, there's so many. I think this is the most exciting time to be alive. And I can completely understand why people will feel slightly overwhelmed and have kind of climate anxiety. I can completely see that. But let's start with energy. The rush for green electrons is incredibly powerful. I've got an app on my phone called Grid Carbon. And when I go onto Grid Carbon, it tells me exactly what the carbon impact of the UK grid supply is now, today, this minute. It's an unbelievably powerful app. And when I first started using it, the average carbon impact of a kilowatt of energy was 500 grams or 500 to 600 grams of carbon per kilowatt. I went on the other day. It was a good day. It was sunny and it was windy. 83 grams. I've just been on now, 200 grams. It's fallen massively on average. We're really winning this race. And the work that's happening down at the Eden Project and other great geothermal research centres, where we're pulling water up from 5 kilometres down at over 160 degrees, supercritical, superheated water to drive steam turbines. This means I think we could be net zero on energy within a decade, all powered from what's already under there. This is so exciting. So I'll start with green electrons, and then I'm not even going to mention solar and wind. That they're amazing, and we haven't even begun to talk about tidal yet. So I think geothermal is the answer there. Then if we look at the things that the consumer, the public would focus on, plastic pollution, everyone's focused on it. We're still putting more plastic out, and there's some really counterintuitive things here, right? So we've got a carrier bag tax in the UK. That has now, reduced the number of single-use carrier bags being manufactured, but we now put more plastic per year into the manufacture of bags for life than we ever did into single-use carrier bags. So the common sense approach makes perfect logic. That's what we're going to do. We're going to tax it. Actually, bags for life are using more plastic per year than single-use bags, and we're now buying more bin bags because those single-use bags were used to line office bins and stuff. So the unintended consequences is really interesting. But every single business is considering an alternative. Some of those are amazing. So I've been playing around with the washing capsule boxes that you can use. So you get those now in cardboard instead of plastic, and they're an incredible alternative. Morrison's paper carrier bag is incredibly well designed, does the job, can be used more than once. So we're beginning to turn the tide of thinking on plastic. We're not beginning to turn the plastic tap off yet. Then we're seeing the revolution in transportation. So this is personal transportation. I used to cycle in London in 1990. I was on my placement year in 1990, and I'd be cycling around London, and I would often be the only person on a bike between Muswell Hill and Camden, and it would be really dangerous. The biggest risk to my life was car drivers. I cycle in London today. I am nowhere near the only person on a bike. There's a huge peloton of us, mainly behaving well, occasionally behaving badly. And the single biggest risk to my life now is not car drivers, it's other cyclists, right? That's amazing. That revolution has has been incredible. And it will not be long before certain roads will be completely traffic free. They will be cycle only. And my advice to you, and I think Tim Smith says the same thing, buy a big house on a smelly old road, because we're going to have to work out what to do with that space over the next 30 years. So we're going to see the rise of much more sensible transport. And we can talk about EVs there as well if we want to, which are nowhere near as bad as the Facebook warriors would have you believe. And then we've got the change in the way that we're designing urban spaces. So we are designing urban spaces so that we need to travel less, so that they are net zero buildings with second and third and fourth, maybe even fifth uses built in. The requirements on planning are elongating the life of buildings beyond the first owner. And there's a really lovely thing here. And we're seeing this emerge. Paris have just done this. Every development in Paris has to have a roof space that it got a proportion given over to solar gain or to net gain, planting something on the roofs. And we've just seen the UK legislation push back here, but there was a requirement from October this year for every development to have a net gain benefit to it. Then we move into agriculture and food, and we've broken the soil. You know, there's that great UN report about 5 years ago that said we have 60 years worth of productive soil. There is some debate about how accurate that is, but what is for certain is our organic content of soil has fallen, the ability for soil to hold water has fallen, and the ability of soil to produce nutrients that feed plants well has fallen. The single biggest thing you can do to guarantee an improved yield tomorrow is to throw more chemical fertilizer at it. The single biggest thing you can do to guarantee a declining yield in 10 years' time is to throw more fertilizer at it, right? More chemical fertilizer. So we're seeing a move away from chemical input into more natural inputs. We're seeing soil protection, and this changes the way that we produce food. Agriculture has a huge carbon footprint. I'm not saying to stop eating meat, because we need animals in a regenerative system for certain. But if we can change the way agriculture is to move away from monocrops, move away from mega farms, then we can increase biodiversity. Because don't forget, if there's no bees, there's no us. Like, biodiversity underpins everything, and agriculture has removed modern agriculture methods have removed biodiversity. So improving soil health gives me huge hope, not just for that, but because it sequesters carbon into the soil. And we're seeing some really interesting stuff here around, and this will be another one, around advanced weathering and looking at carbon sequestration that is genuinely positive, not just growing trees. Growing trees is great, but you've got to start with the soil. Then you look at the type of tree that you're growing. Then you look at how long it can be grown for. And then you look at its second, third and fourth uses. And if you look at an oak in a temperate British rainforest can support 600 other species. That's amazing. You get things growing on oaks that are in those forests down the west coast of the UK. The temperate rainforests are super, super important, and we forget that we have them. And more than that, if we begin to change the way that we sequester carbon, we look at things like seagrass, which have been depleted due to marine life, the marine industry, and to overfishing, then we can increase the amount we sequester into the sea. The sea has done us so much good. It's absorbed 2 degrees of temperature rise already. And if it goes any further, if it hits 4 degrees, ocean acidification it'll be non-stop, and we're going to see the removal of our coral reefs. So we need to look at other ways of sequestering carbon. And then the next thing that gives me hope is environmental education. Every single business I'm working with wants to do something. They might not know what to do. That's my job. But if you look at schools, if you look at colleges, if you look at universities, environmental education is at least at the table. If not, it might not be done well. Then we've got the changing consumer. Then we've got the changing employee. All of these things give me huge hope. And I'm going to say it, and it's quite hard to say. I actually welcome a lot of the environmental activism that we're seeing at the moment, because it's keeping it in the news. It can't be so disruptive that it stops the economy, but to keep it in the news, I think works really, really well. And we'll see more of that. And that can be the gentle activism of Queue for the Climate. A good friend of mine runs that, where people just queue politely in their business suits to sign a declaration that they're going to do more or stand up for climate. Or it can be a shouty version of just stop oil, right? I'll take both of those things. And then we look at TV production as activism. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're watching. Sustainability is on every single show. It's discussed, and we've got the great climate fight about to be broadcast in the UK, which is Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall's new show, which I think will be amazing. And then I think I'll probably finish. The things that give me hope is around brand activism, and literally you cannot go to market and say anything on sustainability without the Advertising Standards Authority or the public saying, "Show me the science." Is that real? Is that really real? You can't just say you're a nature company anymore. You can't just say you're a little bit better for the planet every day. You've got to evidence this stuff. And I welcome that as well. Although the dark side of that is a few businesses will not say as much for fear of being criticised, but they'll be doing it under the radar. So those things give me hope. And the fact that we're having this conversation, and the fact that my kids ask me every single day about sustainability, and I get asked into schools to talk about sustainability as much as I get asked into businesses. All of those things give me great hope.
That was fantastic, Mark. Thank you. What a wonderful note to end on. And thank you for providing that really positive feeling in a really sort of difficult subject. And we really admire the work you're doing in this space. So thank you so much for telling us about the amazing things you're doing, and also for your wonderful book as well. You Can't Make Money from a Dead Planet. Where can people find your book, Mark?
You can find it in all of the good and all of the bad bookshops that you would expect to find it in. So it's in all the high street ones. It's on the big online one. And I don't mind. And you can buy it from the publisher, Kogan Page. You can buy it direct from them. I'll be honest, I liked reading it. After I wrote it, that's my acid test. I read it again and went, "Oh, this is good." And I think that's a good sign, right?
It's a very good sign. A very good sign. Well, highly recommended to our listeners, and we will put links to it in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you so much to Mark for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you to Mark. It was a great listen, and we really recommend the book. You Can't Make Money from a Dead Planet, The Sustainable Method for Driving Profits. It's a really good read, really interesting, and I'm particularly keen to share it with some of my clients who are starting to look at that B Corp journey. So I think it's going to be well worth delving into that for them. As always, we really do appreciate that you've listened all the way through to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for doing so. You can support us and the podcast by leaving a 5-star review wherever you listen to us. It really does help us to reach more people. If you can afford to leave a little review, that would be gratefully received. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard, do share us and pass us on to a friend.
Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with another exciting brand new episode of Starts at the Top.
We'll see you then, and thank you, and bye for now.